Thank you for watching this teaching video from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. Please subscribe to our channel and check out our other videos. Our mission is to help people come to know Jesus better and love Him more every day. We believe that this will not only help our own spiritual growth, but also help us better influence our communities and world for Christ. For more information about Oak Tree, please visit our website at oaktreechurch.com, where you'll find past message series, online giving options, and more information about our discipleship process we call The Path. We'd love to hear from you in the comments or through our website contact form. Now, please enjoy this message.
Chapter 7 and 8, a couple of things that are really important about them. First of all, they bridge the first 6 chapters with the last 6 chapters. Okay? In the first 6 chapters, we have primarily these visions that God gave to Zechariah in one night, right? In the last 6 chapters, we're going to have 2 major prophecies about the coming Messiah. And let's not forget that even Messiah's first coming, Jesus' first coming, that we celebrate Christmas and Easter and all that, that was still 500 years after Zechariah. Okay? So even when we talk about the first coming, we think past and the second coming is future. When Zechariah heard about first and second coming, it was all still future to him. And so the last 6 chapters break down very nicely. Chapters 9 through 11, the first coming. Chapters 12 through 14, the second coming. And so that's we'll get into that. Chapter 7 and 8 bridge that gap between the 2 6 chapters, and it's really one message, but it's broken into 4 parts. Because twice in chapter 7 and twice in chapter 8, we find that phrase, the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord. So in verse 1 of both chapters, and then about halfway through chapter 7, and then way far down in chapter 8. So we've got this word of the Lord came, the word of the Lord came, word of the Lord came, word of the Lord came. But it's all about the same thing. Okay, so it's really one message in 4 parts, or 4 acts, or sections, if you want to look at it that way. Now, let's get a timeline, because when we come to chapter 7, verse 1, we're going to read that we are in King Darius' 4th year, on the 4th day of Hislev, the 9th month, that the word of the Lord came to Zechariah. Well, that doesn't really mean anything to us if we can't put it on a timeline. So here's our timeline. There are a few dates that are given in Zechariah. So the first message, which was in chapter 1, verses 1 through 6, and it was a call to repentance for the people, a call to get back to doing what you're supposed to do, get back to loving God the way you're supposed to, and obeying God, because the main task that they were at right at this point was to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. There had been exiles, about 50,000 exiles had come back out of Babylon, Persia, and they were permitted to rebuild the temple. And they got back, and for 15 years or so, it didn't happen. To the point that Haggai said, as God's prophet, "Why are you living in nice houses and the temple is still in ruins? You've given up on the temple project. You've started your own personal projects." And they had come back in the year 539, and here now we come to we're told that it was the 8th month. That's not supposed to be March. It's not a typo. It's the month of Marchesvan in the year 520 BC. So there had been some work done on the temple, but they never finished it for the first 3.5, 4 years. Then there was about a 15-year gap, so we're 19 years into the restoration of Israel, and the temple is not yet done. And so God sends Haggai 4 messages, all in the year 520, and he sends Zechariah this one message in verses 1 through 6 in the 8th month of the year 520. A couple of months later, in the 11th month, on the 24th of Shevat, in the same year, God gives these 8 visions to Zechariah that we finally finished last week. Then there was a pause, and if we don't have the timeline, if we're not watching carefully, we miss the pause, because The 520 BC was the second year of Darius, and now we've come to the fourth year. Shevat is the 11th month of the second year, and now we come to the ninth month of the fourth year. We're almost 2 full years from the end of chapter 6 to the beginning of chapter 7. There's a huge gap. It doesn't look like that. In my Bible, there's just a tiny little space, but that tiny little space is 2 years. Okay? And if we're just reading through, we can miss that. And so what's happened now is we come to chapters 7 and 8, and this is going to take place on the 4th of Kislev in the year 518. And then when we move into chapter 9 through the rest of the book, it's undated. We have no idea. Okay, some people think it's much later, like there could be a 20 or 30 year gap between chapters 8 and 9. It's the same white space as in between 6 and 7, but it's a lot longer gap. Some people push it way off, some people don't. It's not dated. We don't know for sure. This is the last dated message that we have, but we know that we're into the fourth year of King Darius. We are a couple of years into the temple building project. Now, I think I just lost. There we go. What has happened is that between Haggai and Zechariah encouraging the people to get back on task, get back on the project, they did. They responded positively to these two prophets. And so the temple project now has been underway for this gap of a couple of years. They're about halfway done. They're going to finish the temple in about 5 years. Now, these are round numbers, of course, you know, months and days and everything, but in about 5 years. So we're almost halfway through the temple project. Things are good. People are thinking about the temple. They're thinking about getting the worship started again. They're on track. They're like, okay, this is pretty cool. God hasn't given Zechariah anything for these 2 years that we know of. At least it's not recorded. We have no prophetic message at all during these 2 years that we know of. Right? I mean, God could have, and it just wasn't written down. So things seem to be going really, really well, which is different than what has been so far in Zechariah, right? So there's a different attitude, there's a different tone, there's a different everything. And what happens is in chapter 7, verses 2 and 3, sets the scene for these two chapters. And here it is. Now the people of Bethel, and we'll come back to a couple of these names here. Now the people of Bethel had sent Sharetzer and Regem-melech and their companions to seek the Lord's favor by asking both the priests of the temple of the Lord, who rules over all, and the prophets. And here's the question. This sets up the whole 2-chapter message. Okay, this is what starts it. Should we weep in the 5th month, fasting as we have done over the years? That's it. That's the whole question. That sets up everything. Why do we need 2 chapters for God just to say yes or no? You know, this book could be a lot shorter if God, just answered questions instead of went off on, all these little rabbit trails. But we around here at least we up here like rabbit trails. And so, we're okay with doing this in 2 chapters instead of 2 words. So here's the question. Should we weep and fast in the 5th month the way we have been? And in fact, it's not just have been as we have done over the years, but if you jump down to verse 5 for just a second, well, let's read 4 and 5 because 4 is the word of the Lord who rules over all came to me and said, speak to all the people and the priests of the land as follows. Okay. When you fasted and lamented in the 5th and 7th months, they're just asking about the 5th month. Why do we have to throw the 7th month into this now, right? Through all these 70 years. Now this sets it up. This is helping create the structure here. Because they said, should we weep and fast during the 5th month like we have done over the years? But over the years is pretty vague. It doesn't tell us when they started, it certainly doesn't tell us why they've been doing it, whatever, how long. Now God says, it's not just the 5th month, first of all, it's the 5th and the 7th, and you've been doing it for 70 years. What is that? What's the importance of that number? What's 70 years? That's the length of the exile. So they have been weeping and fasting. They have done this fast throughout the length or throughout the course of the exile. Okay? That's important because one of the things we need to know is that when it comes to the actual law itself, the Mosaic law, the Old Covenant, Mosaic Covenant, whatever term you want to use, God had mandated only one fast for the nation throughout the entire year. Okay, now sometimes you read the Old Testament or even really in the Gospels, and we find it's like people are fasting all the time. So what are you doing? Why are you fasting? What's this? I mean, it must be in the law, right? Nope. God commanded one fast. That was it. And that was in the 7th month, actually, not the 5th, not anything else. He refers to the 7th, but I think he's still not talking about that. I'll show you in just a second. In the 7th month, on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the whole nation was to fast for one day. That's it. That's all the fasting that was mandated. If they wanted to do it more, they absolutely could. And that's sort of the principle in the church as well. I get questions about fasting all the time. People ask me, I'm going to do this fast. What does the Bible say? How long am I supposed to do this? Doesn't say. Do you know that fasting is never, ever commanded for the church? Ever. Not once in the New Testament are we told to fast. Well, didn't Jesus at that one time say, when you fast, you're supposed to do it this way? Yes, he did. And he was a Jew in Israel under the law at that time. Okay? He was not speaking to the church at that point. That was Sermon on the Mount, chapter 6, that he was the one who brought Matthew chapter 6. He was the one who brought it up. So we've got under the law. We've also got some kingdom things going on there, not the church. And then he was attacked sometimes. He said, John the Baptist's disciples are fasting, and the Pharisees' disciples are fasting. Why don't your disciples fast? He's like, why would they fast if I am here right with them? Why would they do that? There will be plenty of time for fasting, and again, thinking in a law-based and an old covenant-based system, not the church. Church hadn't been invented or instituted or even invented yet. He says there will be plenty of time for fasting when they are looking for me, when I am out of the way. And some people say, well, see, that's the church, right? No. Because Jesus, before he left, looked at the apostles and said, I'm not actually leaving you alone. I'm not leaving you orphaned. I am giving you my own very Spirit to be with you. So is there a time in the future, possibly, where God's presence will be removed from the Jewish people? Yes, absolutely. We call it the tribulation, the 70th week of Daniel, where God is calling them back, but he's also punishing them for their sins at that point. And there won't be an indwelling Holy Spirit like we see in the church at this point. And they will be crying out like they did in the Old Testament, please come. And God will say, not yet. And so there will be fasting again in the tribulation during the 70th week of Daniel's prophecy. I'm not saying that we shouldn't fast. I'm not saying that we can't fast. If you want to do that, that's fine. But there really are very few guidelines, very few restrictions as to if you want to undergo a fast, if you want to pray for something, or you want to fast for another. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. You can, as long as you do it with the right purpose and the right attitude. And that's what this whole passage is about. Because that's always been the case. Under the law, in the church, in the tribulation, in the kingdom, doesn't matter. The point has never been about doing what we do, but it's about the attitude behind our actions. And we're going to see this. For 70 years, for the length of the exile, they have been fasting during this 5th month, which was not something that God had commanded them to do. And what had happened, as you can see on the slide, is that the exiles had added at least 4 more fasts to their calendar. And each one of these was a remembrance of something that happened leading up to the exile. So in the 10th month, they were fasting and remembering when Nebuchadnezzar came and besieged Jerusalem. And then 6 months later, in the 4th month of the year, they would fast and remember when the walls were finally broken down and Nebuchadnezzar came in. He wasn't just surrounding, besieging it anymore. He actually broke through. And so there was a day of remembrance, or a time of remembrance, when he broke through. And then we come to the 5th month, which is what they're talking about here, and the temple was destroyed and burned to the ground. And so there was a time of remembrance and fasting for when the temple had been burned to the ground. And that actually is what brought up this question, I think, because they said, hey, the temple's being rebuilt, right? The temple is standing again. Do we have to fast for and remember from when it was destroyed? Because it's not destroyed anymore. That's really the question. The temple is standing. It's not destroyed. Do we have to do that fast? And then in the 7th month, they had a time of remembrance and fasting from when the last governor, Gedaliah, had been assassinated. And basically that's when everything fell apart and the official exile took place. And so that's why they'd been doing it for 70 years, because they were remembering what took them into exile in the first place. And they were remembering and they were fasting during those times. But they added those as days of remembrance. Notice that God did not condemn them for that. He didn't condemn them for that. By the way, let's jump ahead just a little bit into chapter 8, and you'll see that God actually says something about these 4. If you go to chapter 8, verse 19, and remember this is all part of the same message, the same prophecy from God to Zechariah. Verse 18, the word of the Lord who rules over all, that starts our last message, says, the fast of the, what? 4th, 5th, 7th, and 10th. Oh, that's where those come from. You guys have added all these fasts, and you're asking me about one of them, but here's what I'm telling you. These fasts will turn into feasts. And I don't know that works really well in Hebrew, but that's great in English, isn't it? The fasts will become feasts. These times of remembrance and weeping in the future, in the kingdom, will be times of joy and celebration. And there'll be times of feasting, not fasting. There'll be joyful and happy, pleasant feasts for the house of Judah. So love, truth, and peace. So that's sort of a spoiler of where we're going in this chapter 7 through 8 message. It's going to start with weeping and fasting, and it's going to end with joyful celebration and feasting. Okay, that's where we're going. But before he can give them these promises, before he can talk to them about how awesome it's going to be, he has to deal with an issue, and that issue is their hearts. Because the question, should we, in verse 3 here, should we weep in the 5th month, fasting as we have done over the years, can be taken one of a couple of different ways. It can be as simple and innocent as, oh, look, the temple is rebuilt, so we don't have to do this anymore because now we can celebrate the new temple, right? Well, yeah, maybe, but we have remembrances of bad things all the time, even when good things come, don't we? And the Jewish people definitely do that. They remember some of the heartaches, many of the heartaches over the years. Even if times are good, they still remember the bad. So I'm not sure that that's necessarily the only thing behind it. Some people take this to say, man, we've been doing this for 70 years. Can we stop now? Do we have to keep doing this? I mean, I get it. You know, when we were in the land, you know, I got this. But you know, do we have to do this now? Still, it's been 70 years. You know, isn't there like a statute of limitations for some of these rules? We say, first of all, don't forget, God is not the one who started this. Right? You people started this. That would have been my answer, but I'm not God. So he actually answered it a little bit better. Here's another thing to consider, and we need to back up just a bit to verse 2. Now the people of Bethel had sent Sharetzer and Regem-Melech and their companions. Now, Bethel Some translations actually translate this as they sent these two people, Sharezer and Regem-Melech, to the house of God, as if that were the temple. The interesting thing is that the temple is never really called the house of God. Okay, the temple, it's interesting, but it's not. The temple is not called the house of God. But that's what Bethel means. Bayit is house, El is God. So, in fact, it got its name, this city or this location, just about 10, 12 miles north of Jerusalem in what used to be, before the exile, the northern kingdom. Let's not forget, there was a northern kingdom. Israel had been divided. 10 tribes were in the north. 2 tribes, Judah, Benjamin, and Simeon had been assimilated into Judah. But they had been in the south, and there were 2 sets of kings and all sorts of things. If you've been following along with our soap videos in Chronicles, we were showing that. We were reading through there. And what had happened is the northern kingdom, about 120 years earlier, or 120 years before the southern kingdom, were taken into captivity. 722, the northern kingdom was taken by Assyria. In 605 and following, the southern kingdom was taken by Babylon. And so we've got both kingdoms now taken off into captivity. And Assyria was the world empire, and Babylon took them over, including the Jewish exiles. And then Persia conquered Babylon. So we've got everybody, all 12 tribes represented. And when Cyrus in 539 BC said, go back and rebuild the temple, all 12 tribes, people from all 12 tribes, came back to the land of Israel. And where would they go? If you finally got to go back to your homeland, where is the natural place that you would go at least first? Back to your hometown. You may not stay there, but you'd at least like to go back and see where your ancestors came from. If you were old enough to remember, which some of these people actually remembered the previous temple, they definitely wanted to go back and see if their houses were still there, if their land was still there. Not to mention that, or not to forget rather, that God had parceled out specific land for the tribes. So if you're from the tribe of Simeon, if you're from the tribe of Zebulun, you're from the tribe of Asher or Ephraim or Manasseh or whatever it is, you actually had a plot of land that you wanted to go back to because that was your land forever. Okay, so you weren't going to just, it's not that everybody came back and just parked in Jerusalem. They scattered back out and started filling up the land of Israel again. And that included, going back, some people who were from the town of Bethel, the house of God. And it was in Genesis chapter 28 that Jacob named it that. And you may remember that Jacob had a vision or a dream of a ladder. Remember, stairway to heaven? Right? The ladder went from heaven to earth, and there were angels going up and down. And that was his dream. And he recognized, wow, this is the house of God. And so he changed its name from Luz to Bethel, house of God. So now here we are in the year 518, and some of the people who had been living there for upwards to 20 years now. Some of the people from this town, 10, 12 miles north of Jerusalem, Bethel, sent a delegation down to Jerusalem to inquire of the priests and the prophets and say, listen, we are only 8 months away from this fast. Talk about planning ahead, right? We've got a major milestone coming up here in our church. It's only 6 months away, our 70th anniversary this November. If they can plan for a fast 8 months ahead, we should probably plan for a big anniversary 6 months ahead, right? Probably should start thinking about that, start planning that, okay? All right? So here we are, 8 months ahead. They send a delegation to the priests and the prophets, which is really interesting. First of all, prophets is plural. It doesn't say just the prophet. So it's not just Zechariah. It could be Zechariah and Haggai. We don't know. Could be other prophets at that time who just didn't write anything. We don't know. But it's interesting that they wanted to hear both from the priests who oversaw the religious rituals, including the fasts, and they wanted to hear from God's spokesman. Okay, it's not just, we understand that the priests know the law and the priests are going to give us an answer, but we want to make sure that it comes from God and not just the priests. So they came to inquire from the priests and the prophets, should we do this? And God gave his answer through, not the priests, but through one of the prophets, Zechariah. Here's what you need to hear. So, do we need to keep the fast once the temple is rebuilt? And in the rest of chapter 17, he's basically going to answer this with give two answers. Okay, and this is really the meat of the message. This is really the meat of the whole thing, is in verses 4 through 7. The word of the Lord, who rules over all, then came to me. Speak to all the people and the priests. Make sure the priests who are going to oversee this, make sure they understand this message from me. When you have fasted and lamented in the 5th and the 7th months through all these 70 years, did you truly fast for me? For me indeed? That's number one. That's answer number one. Why were you doing it in the first place? Why were you doing this? Were you fasting for me? Were you fasting for the temple? It was the temple remembrance in the 5th month, and then it was the remembrance of Gedaliah being assassinated and kicking off the actual exile. Were you doing these fasts? Were you doing these remembrances for me? Were you doing them for your own remembrance? Were you doing them for your own feel good? Oh, we feel good every year remembering this. Sort of this annual torture. Why were you doing this to begin with? Why were you doing it at all? Verse 6, and now when you eat and drink, when you've broken your fast, when you're done with your fast, when you celebrate the other feasts, I think as well, are you not doing so for yourselves? Hasn't this been for you all along? Why are you asking the priests and the prophets? Why are you asking me if you should keep doing this when, number one, I didn't tell you to, and number two, you didn't ask me to start it, and number three, you weren't doing it for me anyway? And now you're coming back to me? Oh, God, should we continue this? It's like, get real. Come on. This was never about me. And now you're asking me to bless a ritual that you've been doing for 7 decades that I never asked you to do to begin with. Come on. You're doing this for yourselves. Shouldn't, and I think probably because of in verses 5 and 6, there's this me, right? You're doing this for me. You didn't do it for me, whatever. So God is definitely talking. But I think there's a shift in verse 7 where now it's almost maybe Zechariah's narration. Should you not have obeyed the words that the Lord cried out? See, now God is third person, so I think maybe Zechariah is, okay, there's the message from God, and Zechariah has to tack on his part too. Shouldn't you have instead obeyed the words that the Lord cried out through the former prophets? Those prophets before the exile, when Jerusalem was living peacefully, or peacefully inhabited rather, and the surrounding cities, the Negev, that's the southland, and the Shephelah were also populated. So why are you so concerned with doing all this stuff now? Why are you so concerned with keeping up these, let's use the word tradition, that you started in the exile? If this stuff was that important, if doing all these feasts, or all these fasts rather, all these remembrances, if you were really interested in doing what God wanted, you wouldn't have been exiled in the first place. Wouldn't it have been better to actually do what He told you to do when you were in peace than making stuff up in exile and then asking Him if you have to keep doing it? You see what He's asking here? You see the logic behind this? You see what He's trying to reason with them, and this is really the whole thing. Number one, why are you doing it at all? Why are you doing this fast? Why are you doing these rituals? And number two, if it's not for God, what's the point? What's the point? This is, obviously there's the rest of chapter 7, and it'll go into chapter 8, and we'll get there. But this right here, verses 4 through 7, that's the meat of this whole message this morning. Why do we do what we do? In fact, I've got both some personal applications already. I know, not even at the end, but like right here. Some personal applications and some corporate applications that we need to think about. Why do you personally, do the ministry or the religious duties that you do? Why do you do what you do? Whether it's in the church, a ministry that you have in the church, whether it's something that you do outside the church, why do you do it? Well, I think God told me to. Okay? I think it's just, it was a need. I saw a need. I just jumped in. I filled in. Okay. This is a question that we each have to wrestle with. And I'm not going to tell you that you're right or you're wrong. It's something that we have to wrestle with. Why do you do what you do, assuming you do anything? And I think that's a big assumption in here. And there are, let's be honest, there are some believers who are engaged in no ministry at all. Not in their local church, not in their workplace, not at home, not in their schools. They're just completely disconnected. Yes, I'm a believer. Yes, I'm a Christian. I try to be good, but I'm not really going to do anything for one reason or another. Okay? The assumption is you're doing something called ministry. That can be as simple as praying intentionally for somebody. Every day, every week, whatever, on a regular basis. Maybe you can't do anything physically, and we've got a lot of people who have gotten sick over this last year or more, obviously, and people have been either homebound or bedridden. And I remember talking with several people over the years who have called me and said, I want to serve, I want to do something, I just can't get out of the house, I can't get out of my bed, I can't, whatever the thing was that was keeping them back, but at least they wanted to. I said, you know what you can do? You can pray for people. You can write notes and cards. Some of them were technologically literate and some of them weren't. And so I said, you can send emails to some of them. And I said, you can send cards to others of them. You can send texts to somebody. You can do ministry. Even if you can never leave your house, even if you can never leave your bed, you can do ministry. But there are some people who don't do anything. And so the first assumption here is that these people wanted to do something. They thought they were doing it for God. They said they were doing it for God. God apparently did not get that memo because he said, you're actually doing it for yourselves, but at least you're trying. But the question is why? Why do we do what we do? What is the heart behind it? That's the question of this whole passage. What is the heart behind it? Is it a heart, like we sang, of worship, when the music fades and all is stripped away, and I'm just here, you and me, God? Is it actual worship, or is it just duty? Is it just tradition? Or is it actually out of love for God and service? What traditions, we're going to use this word several times this morning, so what traditions are you holding on to that might actually prevent you from doing better ministry, worshiping, ministering more effectively? In their case, they were so concerned about the particular days and the particular weeks and the fasts and all this stuff that they had gotten their eyes off of why they were doing what they were doing, and it was holding them back from doing more effectively what God did want them to do. Sorry, God, we know that you've commanded us to do all this stuff, but we've got our own little thing going on here, and hey, we've been doing it for 70 years, so we don't want to stop now. On one side, I'm sure some people just absolutely wanted to do this. On the other side, there probably were people like, man, do we have to keep doing this? Can't we stop this now? I know for a fact, everybody, I hope I know for a fact. There's an old lawyer thing, never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. But I'm pretty sure everybody would agree with me. There are some times you wake up in the morning and you just don't want to do whatever that ministry was that you were scheduled to do. Maybe you're on a ministry team at church. Maybe it's just a Sunday morning. I just really, really don't want to get up and go to church this morning. Right? Okay, I'm not going to ask for personal testimonies. I'll give you mine. There are Sunday mornings that I absolutely wake up, man, I just don't want to come to church this morning. It's not because I don't like you. It's not because I think it's bad. It's because, sometimes it's because, I really don't want to teach on that particular passage, and it's been a hard week and it's been a hard study or whatever. It's just like, ugh, I don't want to be this bearer of bad news or whatever it is. There can be all sorts of reasons, but every single one of us, I would guess, has had those days where it's just like, can I just disconnect from ministry, from God, from whatever, just for a short time? Just for a short time. Because it seems overwhelming. Here's what I would say. Actually, I would say a lot of things, but here's where I'm going to start saying. Everybody needs a break. There's absolutely no doubt about that. God has built it into creation. That whole work 7, rest 1? Okay? Work 6, rest 1. There we go. It's okay. Somebody who whispered? Somebody whispered. Okay, a couple of people whispered. Okay, nobody said it out loud, but a couple of people whispered, and I almost heard it. Correct me. Work 6, rest 1. He built it into creation. And if you talk to people who work with bodies, coaches and trainers and stuff, they even if they have nothing to do with the Bible, they don't want anything to do with God or anything, they understand that even our bodies are built to have a stretch and release, and a stretch and release. It's not supposed to be stretch all the time. It's not supposed to be go all the time. We use a term for that, burnt out, right? Okay, if we go all the time, we will burn out, even if it's doing something that we're designed to do. I used to say that if we're doing what we are designed to do, what God has created us to do, what God has gifted us to do, we will never burn out. That is true in the context if we're doing everything else His way, like stretch and release. All right? Now, the church does not have a Sabbath day. Okay, we tend to worship on Sundays. That's fine. Okay, we don't have to. It doesn't have to be, in our case, 10:30 Eastern time on Sunday mornings. Now, I know if we changed that time, then people would start having heart attacks and we'd fall all over ourselves and, oh no, what were we going to do? Right? Because we've always done it that way. We actually haven't, but maybe in a year. We always have done it that way. That's that big T word right there. That's tradition. Right? There's absolutely nothing in the Bible that says we have to meet together on Sunday mornings at 10:30, and that is the sweet spot for worship. Now, I really like the fact, and you probably like the fact, it's not 8 o'clock. Right? Get to sleep in a little bit, But, I'm going to step on some toes here for a second, really has bugged me for many, many years. I'm not pointing out anybody in particular, but we get to work at 7 or 8 o'clock, in the morning on time for the rest of the week, but we can't make it to church on time at 10:30. Yes, I'm stomping toes this morning. We're talking tradition. Aren't you glad you came? Why do we do what we do? Why do we have the traditions that we have? So I'm not saying tradition is bad. Okay, some traditions are very, very good. There was a reason that these things started. It was thought through. It was well planned. I just read a thing about, or I'll do a different one. Okay, you've heard the story of the daughter who was cooking the ham in the oven. Have you heard this one? Okay, there's the daughter, and she's cooking the ham in the oven, and before she cooks the ham, she chops off both ends. Then she cooks it. And her husband had watched her do that for a while. He's like, why every time we cook a ham, you chop off both ends? I mean, you're losing some good meat before you cook it. He's like, I don't know. It's what my mom always did. We should ask. So she asked her mom, Mom, why do we chop off both ends of the ham before we roast it, before we cook it? And her mom said, I really don't know. It's what my mom always did. Well, I guess we'll have to go ask Grandma because I don't know, but that's how she always did it. So we, that's what we've always done. I'm glad you're carrying on the family. There it is. So they went and asked Grandma, said, Mom, Grandma, we've got this family tradition where we chop off both ends of the ham before we cook it. Is there like a nutrient thing? Is there, whatever thing? And Grandma said, I don't know why you do it. I did it because my pan wasn't big enough to fit the ham. Why do we do what we do? Do we even know? Do we even know why we do what we do? And this, again, corporately, not just personally, but corporately, what are our traditions as a church? If you're watching online, you're in an organization, you're in a ministry, you're in a church. What are your traditions? Again, traditions aren't bad things. Is it bad to chop off the ends of the ham? Well, yeah, probably, because you can lose some pretty good meat. But, if you're like me, you chop off the end of the ham, then you eat that while the rest of it's cooking. Is probably what happens, right? What traditions do we have as a church? Are they good? Are they bad? Are they actually, sort of like personally, are they hindering us from effective ministry? What can we do for our current congregation? What can we change? What things should be changed? What things should not be changed for our current congregation? And to make things more available for those who are not yet here. I don't remember if I told you this, but when I was in Brazil a couple of months ago, I learned that, at least in the town where I was in Pacochi, they, for the most part, most churches do not meet on Sunday mornings. Their worship services are not on Sunday mornings; they're all on Sunday nights. Not that I care, but why? It doesn't really change anything, but why? And the answer was because historically, or you could use the term traditionally, Sunday morning was when all the vendors from the other areas would come in, and you'd be able to do your weekly shopping on Sunday morning. The stuff that you needed for the week. You're never going to see these people again. They're out on their farms, they're out or whatever, and they're gathering all their stuff, and then they're going to come in on Sunday morning. Historically, that was just the case. And so if a church met on Sunday morning, a couple things were happening. First of all, their members were in that rock and a hard place, right? Should we get the stuff that we need for the week, or should we go to church? And so it was putting their members in an awkward position that they didn't need to be in or shouldn't have been in. Okay? So there are some members who every time the doors are open, they have to be there, right? And the church leadership knows that. And so by scheduling a church service on Sunday morning, they were effectively, yes, it was still the church members' decision, but they were effectively preventing their church members from getting their weekly supplies. If they know that they're scheduling a service at a time that people will not miss for any reason, they're actually keeping them, in a sense, from getting their weekly supplies. Another thing is that it was the opposite of love your neighbor, right? Because if you're, let's say you've got a neighbor or somebody that you've been witnessing to, evangelizing, and you want them to come to the church, you want them to meet some of your friends or whatever, even if you are invested in coming to church on a Sunday morning, they're not. Okay? And so by scheduling their church services on Sunday nights instead of Sunday mornings, it fit with the culture. It was a good way to love their neighbor. It was a good way to be able to get their neighbor to attend church. It was a good way for the membership. It was just good all the way around. They decided to not be tied to a tradition that ultimately, not only did it not matter, but ultimately it was hurting or hindering effective ministry. And I applaud them for that. for being willing to say that's a tradition that doesn't have to keep going. I was at a church this week. I was down in Kansas City this week for a couple of different events. I was speaking at a conference, and I was teaching a class at a school down there, and I got to see my son David. And so it was a busy week. I was only there for about 2-3 days. And the place where I was speaking at the conference, I was going to take a picture and I forgot, but their schedule was on the wall in the lobby. And they don't have a traditional Sunday morning worship service like we have. They don't have like a Sunday school and then a morning worship, or a service and then a Sunday school or whatever. They have 3 classes on Sunday morning. 9 o'clock class, 10 o'clock class, 11 o'clock class. Then they have a Sunday night class. They have 1 or 2 Wednesday night classes. They have a couple of classes like the second Tuesday and the second Saturday and different stuff. And I asked him about that. I said, "Do you have teachers for all of you? I mean, how does that work?" And the teaching pastor teaches most of them, but he has other people who do teach some of these. And they're all different, by the way. They're all different. It's not like if you miss the 9 o'clock, you can hit the 10 o'clock. Okay? They're all different classes. Every single one is a different topic. They're working through the Bible. They're working on specific topics. They're doing whatever. And he said, "You know what I would really like?" I said, "That's a lot. I mean, do you have people that show up to all of these?" He said, people hit, they pick up the ones that they're most interested in at the time and that fit their schedule. He said, "You know what I would really like? I would love to be able to have classes 7 days a week here in the building so that we don't miss anybody. There was always a class available, a study available that somebody could come." Is he ever going to see that happen? I don't know. But at least they're trying, right? At least they're thinking, not just, "I need one more class to teach," because he was like, "I don't need one more class to teach." I'm like, "Well, why are you doing this?" "Because I've got a bigger thing that I want to try to do. I don't want anybody to say, 'Man, if they only had a class on Thursday, I'd be able to make it.'" So let's have a class on Thursday. I want it to be accessible for everyone. It's breaking out of the mold, breaking out of whatever traditions they have. There's an old Lutheran theologian did a lot of work on the concept of tradition and traditionalism, and I found this great quote. His name's Yaroslav Pelechan, and he says, "Tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the," I love this, "dead faith of the living." And this was in an interview that he was giving, and I suppose I should add, it is traditionalism that gives tradition such a bad name. Tradition isn't bad in of itself. It's when tradition becomes the reason for doing things. It's when tradition becomes the thing, and we forget the heart of worship. We forget why we're doing it to begin with. And we are not willing to break that tradition for any reason, even if it could help somebody else. Why do we do what we do as individuals? Why do we do what we do as a corporate body, as a church? Now, God has a lot more to say in chapters 7 and 8. And he will build to the end. I mean, looking forward to the future where, again, these fasts will become feasts. But the big point today is this application. Are we so tied up in tradition? Are we so tied up in, well, we've always cut the ends off the ham, that we can't get to the heart of what is truly important? God says, if you're not doing it for me, then why are you doing it at all? If you're not doing it with the right attitude, why are you doing it at all? If your ministry, if your religious duty, your ritual, your rites, your traditions have become so duty-based that we lose the heart of worship, then we need to stop what we're doing. Sorry, let me change that. We need to keep on what we're doing, but we need to change our hearts. And where I get that is Revelation chapter 2, where God says, or Jesus says to the church at Ephesus, you're doing all the right good stuff. You're doing the good stuff, but you've lost your first love. And he said, so keep doing what you're doing, but get back to your first love. It's an attitude thing. The works are good. Keep up the good works. God designed us for good works. Maybe you're going 7 days a week and you shouldn't be doing that. Maybe you need to take a break. Maybe you need to take a rest, stretch and release and stretch and release. Right? You don't go to the gym and lift weights every day, 7 days a week, because every coach, every trainer will tell you that that's bad. You've got to release. You've got to rest. Ministry is the same thing. Life is the same thing. We need to take breaks. And that includes breaks from ministry sometimes. So we don't quit. We don't give up. We don't say, okay, I'm done. But we take breaks and we refocus where our heart is supposed to be. To use common terminology, we plug back in. We recharge so that we can keep doing the work that God has called us to do. Why do you do what you do? Why do I do what I do? Why do we do what we do? And how can we change something, if necessary, to be more effective, more efficient, and get back to the heart of worship, or remain in the heart of worship that God has called us to?